Hey y'all, I hope you're having a wonderful Saturday. I mentioned that I would be sharing a video, and my apologies, it's taken longer than expected to upload. But some of the things many of us have talked about in some of my lives, this kind of covers that. It's all speculation, just a little food for thought. Thought I'd toss y'all some carrots since we're almost, close to Easter in a month-ish or whatever. And trigger warning, if you cannot think out of the box, this one's not for you. Don't let your kids listen. And I just would love to hear your thoughts. So check this out, and links are in the description.
Forever ruins your ability of justice. Like it perverts your ability to think that you're ever going to find justice. Like I didn't grow up in a family that called 911. You know what I'm saying? Like I grew up in a family that dealt with things in the family. You know, like it was very different. We were fixers for a lot of people. And when they had assets out of containment, that's what was I was going after to start hunting. But when I was my family moved up to the Colorado Springs area so that I could get connected with the Air Force and a lot of the underground operations teams of what is NORAD today. Now is maybe thrown into the Space Force nomenclature, but Schriever Air Force Base and Peterson Air Force Base and Cheyenne Mountain. Colorado Springs is the military. Understand that if there ever is major cataclysms of any kind, Denver, Colorado, Colorado Springs, Colorado is the relocation capital of the United States. That's where it will actually move to in the events of that. And that's under a project that's called the Continuity of Government. And so that's where my family moved because that's where a lot of these clandestine operations teams operated out of. And I got groomed and fostered to be inside that underworld for a lot of years of my life. And it led me into seeing the military industrial complex on a totally different scale because I got to go after and investigate corrupt soldiers. I got to go after and track down people that were involved in human trafficking and that were utilizing Air Force bases, that were utilizing military hardware in order to do that. And so the military has to investigate trained murderers, like the Defense Intelligence Agency and the Army Counterintelligence Agencies, they go after people that every one of them is a trained murderer. So they utilize different clandestine measures, and they have what it was called find, fix, and finish operations, where you get a dossier on another soldier. And when you can substantiate the claims of the evidences that's put there forth, that this person is involved in this, because of the nature of the individuals, perhaps their clearances, perhaps the sensitive information of what they're a part of, or perhaps the potential for political blowback, the military would authorize what is called democide or fratricide, where you are allowed to be judge, jury, and executioner and eliminate this target with full prejudice so that this is not going to come back on them and they're going to have to not deal with the ramifications of that. And so I began to operate inside these teams. One of them was called the Lobos team, which that was their job, was to investigate these corrupt individuals and then eliminate them very discreetly. So that you mitigated the potential for public embarrassment. When you got a defense contractor who is using his position of classified technology research and shutting down radar stations to traffic children, that's super awkward when you have maybe known about it for years. Like, dude, some of these guys were in the Air Force and they had known about it for years, that this is what the facility was being used for, as in order to create black budget projects. But they needed black gold. They needed money to finance illegal operations, black operations projects. So they've been using human organ trafficking and child trafficking and drug trafficking to facilitate that for millennia. But when that suddenly becomes known and that information is going to get out there, they want to eliminate the potential for blowback and witnesses. And so I started seeing how the military-industrial complex was used to cover up each other, that it really wasn't about a true justice. I was just basically a pawn in the game, and they could weaponize that form of justice to go after people for them. But ultimately what I saw was, dude, we were taking out one pedophile in a ring, and there was 150 others that were far more dangerous and far more disgusting, who we were required to leave in place. We were required to not touch, to maintain no contact and unmolested. And it broke my It broke my sense of justice. It broke I became what is called disillusioned in the United States military.
I don't know what I think about Kopaka, but I definitely think that he's tied to this case and not in a bad way. But what was his message? What was his last Facebook post about us and them? And was he conveying something? And who were these said roommates? And why would 1122 King Road Clue Dude call him the crazy pirate and say it was the crazy pirate's last voyage? And lastly, I now know what it feels like to actually have a great uncle's Purple Heart Award with me. And I just want to say, whatever has happened and occurred, I do pray Brent Kopaka is alive and this was some secret mission. But regardless, I'd like to just say rest in peace to Brent Kopaka if that is the case. Thank you for your service.
And I began to rebel and disobey, and it was very, very violent, and it was a very abrupt end to my military career.
And like, how many people do you hear about that are whistleblowers that end up, in the closet? And now that you're connecting these dots, like, I assume that there was somebody that came in at some point and did something, but I didn't know the extent of the type of people that they have doing this work. And the scary part is you hear this stuff so frequently, it makes you wonder how many of these people are really out there that you have no idea about, especially if they are the soccer mom, if they're just the little kid that, you see sitting on the park bench just reading a book one day, and then next thing you know, he's out and about following somebody that he was intentionally supposed to be following, and then back to just sitting on that park bench and reading a book. Like, the extent of it is crazy, and it doesn't really kick in until you have somebody fully explain this stuff to you, like how much this is really going on and who is actually behind, again, all of these people that start speaking out, and then all of a sudden they, end up strangling themselves or jumping off a bridge or doing whatever. And it's always they committed suicide, they had depression, they had this, and they just hide it under that cover, and they have these people slide in and then again just go back to what they were doing. And knowing that a lot of these people are linked in with a lot of these pedophilia rings and all this other weird taboo stuff, like, it just makes a lot more sense that way. And you're talking about disarming people. I mean, if people think that they're just going to do the same thing they do every night, where they're having these interactions and these exchanges with this little boy, and then all of a sudden one day he stops being the passive one and, puts you on your back, and then that's the end of it. Nobody knows the connection. The kid's not going to talk about it. Nobody's going to talk about it. And it's just going to go back to normal. And, this guy must have just hung himself in his closet. I don't know what happened. He must have been really depressed or something. I don't know.
They tell me that I'm never gonna make it. They want me to do something that could make sense. They hate when I
It's what facilitates criminal empires. You understand? Like, this is when you got fixers, this is what they do, though. They're very adept at becoming a chameleon to camouflage themselves through the target's perceptions of what they would not expect to see or what they should expect to see. And that's why in some of the like, when I sit here and I listen to people that are dying suddenly under strange circumstances, like, my mind goes through a totally different set of evaluations of what's really going on there. Like, I have a list of poisons that were conducive towards causing certain types of bodily harm to an individual. Some of those were intentionally designed to have a side effect to leave a telltale signature, and this is how, like, families and brotherhoods, mafias, will make sure that those who are investigators understand that this hit was orchestrated and organized and called in by somebody who has more power and rank and authority than you do. And the way, like, the terminology that was used for me growing up was called a message to the masses. And these are things where, like, when somebody in the fraternal organizations, like a Luciferian, was going out and speaking the secrets, or this is at least the propaganda they give you, when somebody has violated the loyalty to the brotherhood, they would send somebody like myself after them. And one of the entry level warning would be that their finger was dislocated, the ring finger is dislocated, and then it is cut off. Okay, so then they lose their ability to be a ring lord amongst the brotherhood, and then they're allowed to live. Like, it's a kind of a warning. But if they further violate the oaths in that sense, their ring finger is cut off, and then it is placed on the edge of a dagger, a very specific type of dagger, which is what would be called a Fairbairn Sykes dagger, which is a very 6.5-inch needle blade, which is used by commandos predominantly during World War II, but it has been used clandestine operatives for a long time. But that finger is then placed on the end of that dagger, and that dagger is then run through the soft palate of their jaw up into their brain and killing them, but leaving that ring-bearing finger on them, and then that body is just left like that at the scene. Okay, that is a message to all kinds of people that this person died under these circumstances with these telltale signs, and your job is to now cover it up. Your job is to do what you are put in that position as a police, as you're literally, this is your job as the mortician. Cover this one up and make sure it's died of natural causes put on the death certificate. This is how these kinds of operations are done on a regular basis, so that, hey, you may never hear about it as anything other than died of natural causes, but the Reynolds family owned over 50%, some have argued 60% of the funeral homes in the United States. That's the Body Disposal Incorporated facility, like grinding running them into ash and then grinding them up and mixing them into concrete and pouring that slabs, that's how they dealt with a lot of bodies. But they also had morticians whose job it was to augment the body to make it look like somebody who got dismembered by an asset out of containment, a killer who is now killing people as a loose asset and is uncontrollable. Their job is to cover it up and make that body look like it had been injured in a car accident, so that it could be written that they died in this car accident. Same thing happens for undercover operations that are taking place in countries where the United States military has not acknowledged that we're operating. Like, hey, we are not supposed to be operating overtly in North Korea. But if one of our operators gets killed in that country and they recover his body, they have to fly it back to the United States to a mortician to augment the body to make it look like it died in means other than massive gunshot wounds or stab wounds or shrapnel. And so they'll make it look like they got injured in a car accident. Then they'll take the body back to Germany and have it crash in an accident. And then they'll go ahead and notify the widow and the spouse and all of that. They'll give them the whole parade. That's a way that these kind of activities, this black underworld, actually operates.
Even on the other side of it too, I mean, will they intentionally take somebody out and then use that body to try to frame somebody else for something? Because it seems like when we get back to whistleblowers and stuff, there's a lot of them that they try to throw under the category of they're a mass murderer, they're a serial killer. But when you start actually reading their manifestos, it seems like they're whistleblowing on a lot of information. Just to at least from your experience, have you noticed that they reuse these bodies in order to frame somebody else for something else, or try to expose somebody with irrational ideas, I guess, from their perspective, and try to make it seem like it's something absolutely crazy, so that it's just kind of flooding and mucking up the water, so that if people they hear about this serial killer who has this manifesto and he's talking about all of these elites and talking about all of this, if we make it seem like this guy's a serial killer, then people are just going to take the manifesto as just the ramblings of a lunatic at this point.
I can't say I've investigated many of those aspects of what you're asking there. When it comes to serial killers and manifestos, I have seen, what I've seen more consistently has been, that the James Holmes is a good example. A guy here, here's a reference for you readers out there. William Ramsey has written some of the best investigative books when it comes to this type of shadowy underworld. His book, one of them is called Program to Kill, which goes into a lot more details on case-specific examples of people like the Son of Sam or the Smiley Face Killers and some of these other serial killers. And who were they really? What's their origin story? One of the other ones, like the mass shooters of James Holmes, which is responsible for the Aurora shooting incident. But he just happened to be portrayed in the media as this guy all dressed up with crazy hair and looking like the Joker. He's the Dark Knight shooter in Aurora, Colorado. And the reality of that guy, though, they portrayed him to be this lunatic, this crazy guy, a singleton killer, right? That's the common narrative that we get with a lot of these. There's always a cadre of people behind the man. And in fact, the people you need to always spend the most time investigating is their psychologists, is their counselors, is the people that had that access to information. But James Holmes was a very successful and very talented neurosurgeon student, guy who studied neurosciences, right? Neurosciences, brilliant, right? Scholarships, the whole nine, brilliant mind. until the psychologist from the Central Intelligence Agency, the Catholic Intelligence Agency, got a hold of his mind and weaponized him, right? And turned him into what is called an Omega Protocol shooter. So there's different kinds of assassinations or killers that are hardwired and programmed. One of them is like you are sent after a target and you are to die at the end of it. You're to die at the end of it, a disposable one. Ideologically, they want somebody who has a religious ideology or motivation factor in order to be willing to be a suicide bomber, right? Omega programming is the end of the line when it comes to the brainwave states of Greek-based programming systems, and this Omega programming is the suicide protocol, so that you're designed to kill yourself. You know, if you're ever captured behind enemy lines, you take the cyanide pill, you cut your own throat, you stab yourself, you shoot yourself, that kind of stuff. James Holm, when he was captured, he was not supposed to be captured alive. He was trying to kill himself over and over again. He was in that Omega state, lost in that promise state, trying to kill himself, but he was taken alive. And so instead, now they had a daisy out on the chain that needed to be handled through the press, right? And so that's how they portrayed him. So that's an example that I can see that's maybe a bit more in line with that. And William Ramsey did a good investigation on that, and so did another guy named Russ Dizdar. Russ Dizdar, this is his book called Expelling Darkness, Engaging Non-Human Entities Now and in the Days, and the End of Days. He had a much better case-by-case study of dealing with mass shooters and the programming and the handlers, and he would dive in super deep on investigative reporting on those kinds of guys. But James Holmes is a good example of that. But as to your question regarding the use of bodies as a means of stacking them onto other people for incrimination, I don't have as much experiential knowledge of that side of the equation on that regard.
And I do have a question. I want to kind of dive into something you'd mentioned a little bit earlier, but before I get into all of that, of course, just something that I kind of have come to a conclusion out of my own, and I kind of just am curious of people's experiences having gone through this kind of stuff. There seems to be obviously this huge link and connection between these occult rituals and leading into the government side of things, where they're trying to take people out, they're trying to do all of these secret operations, coming from somebody on the inside of it, of course. When it comes to the occult stuff, do you think that there is this huge spiritual side to all of this stuff? Or even on the other side, do you think that the people who are conducting this stuff believe in the big spiritual side of all of this stuff? Or do you think that it's just a means of, again, doing this mass manipulation, this master understanding of psychology, and there's not necessarily this like magic or spiritual side to it? It's just part of the inevitable game in order to fulfill your end agenda of manipulating the human mind?
It's a great question. I sincerely believe it is a devotion and a loyalty to other spiritual influences. These people have deep-seated fidelity, loyalty to Luciferianism. You know, there was three main branches of what I saw expressed in there that was the core tenets of what drove many of them. On one side, you had a technocratic approach, whereas science and technology was maybe the vision of how we could control humanity without the need for religion to be incorporated into it. But the form of scientism that I saw was literally its own religious class, where the priests were the experts, where the priests were the ones who had decoders. I mean, the guys who literally create magical coding to create this communication form between waves. That was one side of the religious order that I saw and experienced that had a very similar fervor of devotion and power and influence that drove them. That was maybe more from an outside perspective, atheistic or agnostic, but still had all the same levels of religious orders and priest class and hierarchical structures of a religion, just masquerading as something other than that. Whereas the family that I was raised with, they were what you would say I would specifically identify as Luciferians, and I use that different than Satanists. They often get lumped together, but there is no, through the scriptures from Genesis to Revelation, there's no point in the scriptures where Satan and Lucifer are identified as the same entity, the same being. The Satan is a fallen seraphim. He is a fallen serpent, like what you and I would think of as like a winged serpent. Okay. his rebellion and his choices in life were to be adversarial and prosecutorial, like somebody who is much more of a legal prosecuting attorney in his regard, in his role, and somebody that was always appealing for legal rights to enact his will on the earth. Whereas Lucifer is the name that we get. That's a Latin bastardization of the name Halel ben Shahar, which is better translated as the shrieking one, the howling one, the son of the howling morning. And he was much more involved as a cherub. He's described as a cherub, which is a different entity, a different species. You know, there's seraphim, which are those serpentine ones. There are ophanim, which would be like the physical bodies, the chariots of fire, these orbs of light. They're the literal ships that have a spirit in them that transport and teleport and move around transdimensionally. And then you have another one that's described, which is cherubim, and then messengers or angels, like we would call it, along with hierarchies amidst each of these. These are all separate species of immortals. My contention is they are actually immortals, meaning they had a beginning, but they don't die. And so therefore their choices have long-term consequences on the plane of existence that you and I live on, because they're masters of psychological manipulation because they've been around a long time. You know, they physically have a lot more data and information to be able to run psychological operations on here on the earth for good or for evil. And Lucifer really was one who had I wills, declarative statements and covenants of swearing his power to take the throne of the Most High, and he will ascend to the heights of the heavens. Like, he specifically declared these I wills, and the invocation of power came from secret knowledge. He utilized a force that was called iniquity, which was like overt, continual rebellion to all things morality-wise. And so Luciferians, they are adepts at seeking apotheosis and ascension to godhood through secret knowledge. And if they can balance much of their evil deeds with their good deeds, they can hold the power of the dark and the light simultaneously, that they can be workers of good and evil, of bad and good, of bad and good at the same time. And so that's where we get a lot of the mystery religions and a lot of the Luciferians in the forms of Freemasonry, Rosicrucianisms, and like Daughters into the Eastern Star. A lot of those cults. That was one very potent side of my family's religious fervor, willingness to be like, we are gods, like we are descendants of the gods. We have the literal right to rule these cattle. You know, like this subhuman. They like literally the idea is that these species around us were like baboons. You know, and this is what played on to Darwinian evolution, and the Spiritism movement was like literally looking at people as a subspecies of apes. You know, this comes from Luciferians, you guys. This is not scientific method at all. This comes from the religious rites and rituals and the practices of Luciferians that they then bolstered up one of the most wealthy families in the entire history of the world, which was Darwin's family. You know, he was a chosen asset to bring forth that scientific justification for ruling over people and to bring about forms of systematized eugenics. You know, these are doctrines of Luciferians that come from that godhood approach, that we are gods. We've ascended the path. This is why George Washington is enthroned on the seat of Zeus. In the top of our Capitol building in ISIS's womb. You know, like we live in a important country that is filled with Egyptian sex magic everywhere, and these people are deep devotees. That's why they take their presidents and they lay them in state for their apotheosis ritual, like John McCain. They put him in there for his rites and rituals because he was birthed in the ashes of Phoenix, doing all these horrible abuses of children, and had passed through those rituals and was given the ascension path and laid in state and worshipped and honored and adored so that he could be ascended as Zeus in the Capitol building. So these people absolutely believe it. And the reason I am place where I'm at, where I've tested the scriptures for myself and read them from Genesis to Revelation, and found that that was the most accurate description of how I've seen the spiritual hierarchy play out and how I've seen the physical hearts of man and women play out, that there is this literal war for the souls of mankind. And we are living in the time and the days where that veil of secrecy is splitting open. There's a revelation of the beast, and there's going to be a revelation of Yeshua of Nazareth, the King of Kings. And there is going to be a war between radical intelligent evil and radical righteousness, and it's playing out every day in front of our eyes.
tell me that I'm never gonna make it. They want me to do something that could make sense. They hate when I keep dreaming I'll be famous, but I don't give a fuck, I'ma keep chasing. I got all this potential that's deep inside of me, but they hate when you're successful cause they try to be. They sit there being judgmental because you're trying things, and they just want you to settle and do the right thing. So get a good job, don't slack off. Wake up every morning, make a good impression on your boss. Don't do anything that I wouldn't do, and when you're making money, make sure you don't spend it too soon. Fuck that, I'll do what I wanna do. I got a different path from everyone, and that